Okay, let's jump straight in. We're looking at something that, well, might sound a bit technical at first, how money moves around in India.
Yeah, specifically between the central government and the states.
Exactly. But, we started digging into this. We found it's actually pretty charged. There's a real simmering political and economic showdown happening.
It's definitely not just boring numbers. This gets to the core of how India functions as a large, diverse country. It's all about something called fiscal devolution,
Right?
which is basically the system, the rules for how the center, which collects most of the taxes, shares that revenue with all the different states.
And that sharing process, that's where the friction is right now.
A lot of it, yeah. Significant friction.
And there's a key player in all this, isn't there? This 16th Finance Commission, XCFC.
That's right. They're a constitutional body set up specifically for this task. They're working right now to figure out the formula.
And the recommendations, they're due October 2026.
Yep, that's the timeline. And those recommendations will decide how this, tax pie gets sliced and shared for the next 5 years.
So no wonder they're in the hot seat.
Absolutely. All eyes are on them.
Okay, so for this deep dive, what we really want to do is pull back the curtain on this whole tussle. Understand why some states are sounding the alarm.
What are their specific complaints? What's driving this?
And ultimately, why does this process, which sounds kind of technical, matter so much for the future of India's federal structure, the balance between the center and the states?
Exactly. It's fundamental.
So maybe start with the basics. How is this supposed to work? The center collects the taxes.
Right. The bulk of them anyway. Then, a certain chunk of that revenue pool is meant to be shared downwards with the states. That's called vertical devolution.
Okay, center to states. Vertical. Got it.
Then the money that goes to the states, that total share needs to be divided among all the different states.
Ah, okay. And that's the horizontal bit.
That's horizontal devolution, yes. Based on various factors, needs, population, maybe performance, area, things like that.
It sounds a bit like, I don't know, dividing up a family dinner or something.
Yeah.
Everyone gets a share.
Or maybe a potluck where everyone brings something, but then how do you share out the main dish fairly? With the Finance Commission is supposed to be the designated distributor.
The referee.
Kind of. A neutral referee, in theory. They come up with the formula, the criteria, the grants every 5 years. The idea is fairness, equity.
Okay, in theory. But this is where we started finding some, let's say, complexities about that neutrality.
Well, yeah. When you look at how the commission is actually set up, there are questions.
Such as?
The members, the chairperson, they're appointed by the prime minister,
Right.
and the terms of reference, which is basically their mandate, what questions they focus on.
The rules of the game.
Exactly. Those are drafted by the Central Finance Ministry.
So the body deciding how the center shares money has its members and instructions coming directly from the center itself.
That's the structural setup, yes. And it has led to criticism. We found that people have raised flags about past commissions and even the current one, the XCFC.
What kind of flags?
Concerns about, say, not enough representation from certain regions, particularly South India, on the commission, or maybe members having perceived close ties to the central government.
So states might look at that and think, is this referee really impartial?
It certainly fuels that perception for some states. They wonder if the starting point is already tilted,
And that feeling, that potential tilt, it gets magnified by this really stark reality in India, doesn't it? This economic and political divide.
Huge divide. You've got, broadly speaking, northern states that often carry more political weight nationally, more MPs perhaps.
Right.
But economically, on average, they might be lagging behind.
And then you have the South.
Southern states like Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, real economic engines, they contribute a massive slice of the national tax revenue. Way more, proportionally.
So the ones contributing the most money feel like they have less political clout, while the ones with more political clout contribute less money.
That's the core asymmetry, yes. It's like the hardworking cousin footing the bill while the louder uncle decides how the money's spent. That's maybe a crude analogy, but it captures some of the feeling.
And it breeds resentment, I imagine.
It certainly creates tension. The economically strong states feel they aren't getting a fair shake financially from a center where political power might be concentrated elsewhere.
And you mentioned politics. It's not just about the money flow, is it? There are other political dimensions adding fuel to this fire.
Definitely. We've seen accusations flying around, things like the center's ruling party, which is stronger in the north, allegedly using its power against southern state governments where it's not in charge.
What kind of things?
Disputes over the role of state governors appointed by the center, big debates about pushing Hindi language policies, cultural clashes. It all adds layers.
So it's like the financial disagreement is happening against a backdrop of broader political and cultural friction.
Exactly. It makes the financial issues feel less like technical adjustments and more like part of a pattern of perceived central overreach, or at least a lack of understanding.
Which I guess really undermines trust, that federal bargain you mentioned.
Absolutely. If states feel they're being squeezed financially and pressured politically, that sense of being equal partners in the Indian Union starts to fray.
Okay, let's get specific then. Karnataka has been really outspoken, right? Their chief minister, Siddaramaiah.
Incredibly vocal, he's used strong language calling central actions unfair, anti-federal, not mincing words.
And they've put out some numbers that really grab your attention.
They have. Their core argument is based on these figures. They say Karnataka contributes a huge amount, something like RM 4 lakh crore annually, to the national tax pool.
Wow, okay.
But then they claim they only get back a tiny fraction of that. The figure they often quote is just 15 pays for every rupee they send to the center.
15 pays back for every 100 cents. That sounds dramatically low.
It's a stark comparison, and whether the calculation is perfect or not, the feeling behind it is powerful. When you feel you're putting in 100 and getting back 15, that gap feels fundamentally unfair.
And they've gone beyond just that ratio, right? They've pointed to specific losses.
Yes, they've calculated alleged losses due to specific central government policies. One big one is over Rs 53,000 crore they claim to have lost between 2017 and 2025.
53,000 crore, how?
Primarily because of how things called cesses and surcharges are treated.
Okay, what are those?
They're like extra taxes the center levies on top of regular taxes, usually earmarked for specific purposes like education or infrastructure.
Right.
But the crucial point is, the revenue collected through these cesses and surcharges doesn't legally have to be shared with the states through that main divisible pool we talked about.
So the center keeps all of that.
Largely, yes. So states like Karnataka see the center relying more and more on these tools, collecting revenue from economic activity within their state borders, but then keeping it outside the main sharing mechanism.
It sounds like a way to bypass the devolution formula.
That's exactly how the states perceive it. A way to increase central resources without increasing the state's share.
And it's not just the overall amount, it's hitting actual services on the ground.
Yes. Karnataka pointed to specific grant cuts. Money they expected for, say, urban local bodies for their Panchayat Raj institutions, that's village-level governance.
Crucial local stuff.
Absolutely. Cuts to health grants, even cuts to disaster relief funds. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They argue this directly impacts their ability to deliver basic services to their citizens.
Schools, hospitals, local roads.
All potentially affected.
And the reaction from Karnataka's leadership.
Well, Siddaramaiah has even mentioned the possibility of democratic protests, taking it to the streets if their concerns aren't heard by the center and the Finance Commission.
That shows how serious they are. It's not just bureaucratic wrangling.
It's becoming highly politicized, yes.
And it's not just Karnataka making noise, is it? Andhra Pradesh is also in the mix.
That's right. Their chief minister, Chandrababu Naidu, has also weighed in, putting forward specific suggestions to the XX Finance Commission.
What are they proposing?
Some significant shifts. On the vertical share center to states, they're suggesting boosting the state's total share from the current 41% up to 50%.
50%, that's a big increase. The last commission actually reduced it slightly, didn't it?
It did. The XVFC recommended 41%, down from 42%. So asking for 50% is a bold proposal.
And what about the horizontal part, dividing it among states?
They want changes there, too. Specifically, they want to tweak the weight given to different factors in the formula. A key one is population.
Population. This seems to be a recurring theme, especially for southern states.
It really is. Currently, a state's population size is a significant factor in determining its share of the pie. More people, generally, more money, partly based on need.
But the southern states argue?
They argue that they've been much more successful over the past few decades in controlling their population growth. They implemented family planning policies effectively.
And now they have lower fertility rates.
Exactly. Lower fertility rates, which means their populations are growing much slower, or in some cases stabilizing, and they're aging faster. They have a higher proportion of older people, a higher dependency ratio.
So they feel the formula penalizes them for doing what was considered good policy, controlling population growth.
Precisely. They feel like they're getting less money now because they succeeded in family planning back then. They see the formula rewarding states, often in the north, which still have higher fertility rates and younger, faster-growing populations.
It's like being punished for good behavior in their view.
That's the essence of their argument. They feel the formula doesn't reflect their current demographic reality, the costs of an aging population, the success in stabilization. So Andhra suggests drastically reducing the weight given to population, maybe from 15% down to just 5%.
And maybe factoring in other things, like environmental contributions.
Yes, that was another suggestion, rewarding states for things like forest cover, environmental protection efforts, a shift in criteria.
It really drives home how these seemingly technical formulas have massive political and social consequences. They embed incentives and disincentives for state policies.
Absolutely. They're not neutral calculations. They reflect choices about what gets valued and rewarded in the federal system.
And, stepping back from the pure finance, we found something else about Karnataka that adds a really interesting, almost ironic layer to their complaints.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Well, despite feeling like they're getting a raw deal from the center, Karnataka actually came out on top #1 in recent index measuring devolution within the state.
Within Karnataka, you mean how they share power with their local government?
Exactly. It's the IAPA's Panchayat Devolution Index for 2023-24. It looks at how well states empower their panchayats, the village councils giving them funds, functions, accountability.
And Karnataka ranked first.
First, excelling in finances, accountability, delegating actual responsibilities. Kerala and Tamil Nadu were also ranked highly, by the way, other southern states.
That is fascinating. So the state that feels most strongly about the center not devolving enough resources to it is actually leading the way in devolving resources within its own borders.
Right. It highlights that this isn't just about states wanting cash. It suggests Karnataka, at least by this measure, is serious about grassroots governance, about empowering local bodies.
And it makes their complaint perhaps even sharper. They're saying, we're doing our part locally, but the system above us is holding us back.
It adds that dimension devolution isn't just centered to state. It's about the whole chain of governance, right down to the village.
And effective local governance needs resources, which loops back to the center-state sharing.
There's also a historical context we should probably touch on. June 2025 is coming up.
The 50th anniversary of the emergency.
Yeah, a period remembered for extreme centralization of power in India. Now, obviously, the current situation is very different, but...
But the themes resonate. Concerns about central overreach, about states feeling ignored or pressured.
Exactly. When states start talking about anti-federal moves and the center hoarding power, it inevitably brings back echoes, however faint, of that period. It touches a nerve about the balance of power.
And it erodes trust. That fundamental trust needed for a complex federal system like India's to work smoothly.
Which brings us back to this idea of India as a union of states. It sounds simple, but it's a constant balancing act, isn't it?
Incredibly delicate. You need a center strong enough to hold the country together, manage national issues, defense, foreign policy.
But you also need states that are empowered enough, resourced enough, to handle the immense diversity of needs across the country. Health, education, local infrastructure, these are largely state responsibilities.
Tip the balance too far towards the center, and states feel alienated, like mere administrative units. Let states become too autonomous without coordination, and you risk chaos or fragmentation.
And those demographic differences we talked about, the aging South, the younger North, they just made finding that balance even harder, right?
Much harder, because their needs are diverging. The South might need more investment in healthcare for the elderly, while the North might need more schools for its young population. A one-size-fits-all approach from the center becomes increasingly difficult.
And the southern states feel the current financial system, the devolution formula, isn't keeping pace with these demographic shifts.
They feel it's stuck in the past, rewarding population numbers that don't reflect their reality or their policy successes. They feel penalized for having smaller families and now facing the costs of an aging society.
It's this potent mix, economics, demographics, politics, regional identity, all tangled up.
It really is. You know, someone even drew a parallel with the film industry recently.
Oh, how so?
Comparing the massive national and even international success of Southern cinema lately, films from the Telugu, Tamil, Kannada industries.
Yeah, they've been huge.
Compared to some of the perceived struggles or disconnect of mainstream Bollywood based in Mumbai.
Interesting analogy. What's the connection?
The suggestion was, maybe Southern cinema's success shows a better connection to diverse audiences, a vitality, a broader appeal.
That perhaps the political center sometimes lacks when dealing with the diverse states.
That was the idea, perhaps a bit whimsical. But the point was, maybe the X6 Finance Commission could learn something from how Southern cinema managed to find that broad resonance across India. Find a formula that appeals more widely.
A creative way to think about it. But the underlying point is serious. India's federal structure is under genuine strain.
And the way money flows, decided by this Finance Commission, is absolutely central to either easing that strain or making it worse.
And the big worry seems to be that the commission might just stick to the status quo. Business as usual.
That's the concern we picked up on. If the X6FC recommendations don't really grapple with these deep economic and political divides, if they don't find a way to acknowledge the grievances, especially from the South,
Then the report in October 2026.
could become a real flashpoint, a lightning rod for discontent rather than a solution.
Because this isn't just abstract political science or economics, is it? This has real-world consequences for people.
Absolutely. We're talking about the resources states have for the things that matter day to day. Building and running schools, staffing hospitals, maintaining roads, ensuring clean water, creating opportunities.
It's about whether a child in Karnataka gets the same quality of education infrastructure as a child in Uttar Pradesh, partly depending on how this money is shared.
Exactly. It's about ensuring a certain baseline of services and opportunities across the country while respecting regional differences and contributions.
The stakes feel incredibly high if they don't find common ground.
The risk is what some call a fiscal fracture, a deep crack in the financial relationship between the center and states, fueled by mistrust and resentment. And that kind of fracture could take years, maybe decades, to heal. It would make governing India much, much harder.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what we've really seen is this intense, high-stakes fiscal tug-of-war, center versus states, particularly some very vocal and economically powerful southern states.
And the focal point for all this, for now, is the 16th Finance Commission. Their report, due October 2026, is the next big milestone.
So we're watching, aren't we? Will the center show flexibility? Will it acknowledge the depth of these concerns and try to find a new balance?
Or will the states that feel shortchanged feel they have no choice but to escalate? We heard threats of protests. Will the South's economic muscle start to translate into more political leverage in this federal equation?
It really makes you think. That tax money you pay, it's not just going to services. Right now, it's fueling a fundamental debate, maybe even a battle, over the very nature of India's federal soul.
It's a fascinating, complex interplay of money, power, population, and identity.
So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, to ponder is this. How does this constant negotiation, this tension between national unity and regional needs, between central control and state empowerment, how does it all ultimately shape the everyday reality, the opportunities, the lives of people living in vastly different parts of India?
It's a question that cuts much deeper than just the budget figures. It's about the lived experience of federalism in India today.